May 22nd, 2011. A woman calls 911 from inside a strip mall parking lot in Joplin, Missouri. Her voice is shaking. She says, "There's a tornado on the ground. It's huge." The line cuts off. 8 minutes later, a third of the city is gone. 158 dead, 1,150 injured, 7,000 homes destroyed. A damage path 1.3 miles wide, cutting through the heart of a community of 50,000 people. The loudest sound anyone who survived it describes is silence, because after the wind stopped, there was nothing left to make noise. The National Weather Service had been tracking the system all day. What they hadn't anticipated was what happened next. This was not just another tornado in a state that sees dozens of them every spring. This was something that would redefine what a single storm could do to a single city. Then the EF5 rating, the highest on the enhanced Fujita scale, was officially assigned within 48 hours. But the number doesn't capture the reality. In 8 minutes, an entire town's sense of security was erased. Before this night, the deadliest single tornado in American history was the 1947 Woodward, Oklahoma storm, which killed 181 people in a much smaller, less populated region. After May 22, 2011, that record stood in the shadow of Joplin. This is the story of the Joplin Tornado, the deadliest single tornado in modern American record-keeping. And this is exactly how it happened. To understand how a city of 50,000 people could be devastated in under 10 minutes, you have to understand what conditions had to align first. Joplin sits in southwestern Missouri, in the portion of the state that arguably gets more tornado action than anywhere else in America. The region sits at the intersection of warm, moist air from the Gulf of Mexico and the dry, descending air from the Rockies. When those two air masses collide in spring and early summer, the atmosphere becomes a loaded weapon waiting to go off. By May 2011, the conditions across the Midwest had been primed for disaster for weeks. A persistent jet stream pattern had locked warm, humid air across the region. Surface temperatures in Joplin had climbed into the low 80s with dew points in the high 60s. The kind of atmospheric humidity that weather forecasters watch for like a doctor watching vital signs. The National Weather Service in Springfield had been issuing watches for days. But watches are not warnings. Watches mean conditions are favorable. Warnings mean something is happening. The distinction would matter enormously on the afternoon of May 22nd. The storm system that would produce the Joplin tornado had traveled across Kansas and Oklahoma all morning, feeding on that warm, unstable air. By early afternoon, supercell thunderstorms had already begun firing along the dry line in eastern Kansas. One of those cells, the one that would eventually become the Joplin storm, had been tracking northeast for hours, growing stronger with every mile. It had already produced golf ball-sized hail in parts of Kansas. It had already shown the rotating updraft structure that meteorologists call a mesocyclone, the atmospheric fingerprint of a tornado waiting to be born. At 2:45 p.m., the National Weather Service in Springfield issued a severe thunderstorm warning for parts of Jasper County. The word tornado had not yet appeared in any of their bulletins. By 5:17 p.m., it would be too late for that to matter. 5:17 p.m. The first tornado warning for Joplin is issued. The National Weather Service radar had detected rotation in the storm. The warning covers Jasper County. It gives people approximately 20 minutes of lead time. Most people in Joplin heard the warning on local television or through emergency alert systems. But in a city that had seen tornado warnings before and survived them before, the warning was met with the same familiar response it always received. Some people paid attention. Most didn't. The 20-minute window was about to reveal itself as the most important 20 minutes in Joplin's modern history. People were at dinner. People were at church. People were at graduation. People were closing up shops. None of them knew what was coming. 5:34 p.m. The tornado first touches down 6 miles west of the city near the Jasper County Airport. The first structures it encounters are metal outbuildings and power lines. Witnesses in the area described seeing a debris field of metal and insulation already forming before the funnel was fully visible. The tornado was already wide, already powerful, already moving at what later analysis would determine to be 30 to 35 miles per hour. It was not playing around. It was not hesitating. It was coming straight for the city, and it was not going to stop. 5:40 p.m. The tornado enters the western edge of Joplin's residential areas. The first neighborhoods it hits are primarily single-story homes built in the 1950s and 60s. These structures were never designed to withstand an EF5. They were annihilated. The National Weather Service Damage Survey would later describe ground scarring, the literal scouring of grass and soil from the earth, in this area, a phenomenon typically reserved for the most violent tornadoes on record. Trees were stripped of bark. Houses were not merely damaged or destroyed, they were removed from their foundations and scattered across multiple blocks. A car's engine block was found embedded in a concrete wall 3 blocks away from where the car had been parked. 5:41 p.m. The tornado crosses Schiffer-Decker Avenue and enters the commercial district. This is where the physics of the storm did something almost unimaginable. The tornado, already over a mile wide, began to undergo a process meteorologists call vortex merger, where multiple smaller subvortices within the larger circulation consolidated into a single, more powerful circulation. The wind speeds in these subvortices can be 100 miles per hour higher than the surrounding winds. The National Weather Service would later estimate that winds within the Joplin tornado reached 200 to 250 miles per hour. The official EF5 rating requires winds of 200 miles per hour or greater. Joplin had met that threshold and exceeded it. 5:44 p.m. The tornado strikes St. John's Regional Medical Center. The building, a 6-story hospital with approximately 200 patients inside at the time, takes a direct hit. The exterior walls of the top floors are ripped away. Windows explode inward. The eardrum-shattering roar of wind inside a structure that was never designed to withstand those forces fills every room. Of the 200 patients inside, all are evacuated. Miraculously, no patients die. But the building's destruction becomes one of the defining images of the disaster. The tornado had struck the one place in the city where the most vulnerable people, the sick, the injured, those who couldn't evacuate on their own, were concentrated. It would have been easy for the death toll to be catastrophic. Somehow, it wasn't. The reasons for that miracle would later be attributed to the specific construction of the hospital's interior corridors and the quick thinking of staff who had received emergency training. But the moment itself, a hospital taking a direct hit from an EF5, had never happened before in recorded American history. 5:45 p.m. The tornado crosses 20th Street and enters the most densely populated residential area in its path. Homes in this area were packed close together, a typical mid-American neighborhood where the space between houses might be 30 feet. At the wind speeds this tornado was producing, that spacing did nothing. The destruction was total. The National Weather Service Damage Survey would later describe this area as having no walls left standing. In one block, a brick home was reduced to its foundation. The bricks were found scattered over a quarter-mile away. The tornado was not destroying homes, it was disintegrating them. The word destroyed doesn't capture what happened. The word erased is closer. 5:47 p.m. The tornado strikes East Middle School. School had let out 2 hours earlier, but a graduation ceremony was being held in the gymnasium. Students, parents, and teachers were present. The gymnasium, a windowless concrete structure, held approximately 50 people at the time. The gymnasium took a direct hit. 3 walls collapsed. The ceiling lifted and then came down. 7 people died inside, among them multiple students who had stayed for the ceremony. The Joplin School District had followed all standard safety protocols. The school's tornado shelter was designed for an EF2. An EF5 had different plans. The building that was supposed to protect children became their tomb. 5:48 p.m., the tornado crosses Range Line Road, Joplin's primary commercial artery. The Home Depot, a Walgreens, a gas station, and multiple strip malls line this road. The tornado had already destroyed homes. Now it turned its attention to retail. The Home Depot, a building with wide-span roof structures and large glass frontage, offered no resistance. The roof collapsed. The front glass exploded inward. Cars in the parking lot were thrown hundreds of yards. The Walgreens next door lost its entire front wall. Emergency responders arriving later would describe walking through what looked like a war zone in a country that wasn't America. But it was. It was Joplin, Missouri on a Sunday evening. The kind of evening that should have been quiet. 5:51 p.m., the tornado begins to lift. The funnel thins. The debris field narrows. By 5:54 p.m., the tornado is no longer on the ground. 8 minutes. That's what the United States Geological Survey later confirmed. The tornado had been on the ground for approximately 22 miles in 8 minutes. That's an average speed of about 32 miles per hour, slow enough to drive a car, fast enough to destroy everything in its path. It left behind a damage path 1.3 miles wide in the city proper. A third of Joplin was gone. Not damaged, not hurt, gone. Sarah Jones, 28, waitress at a diner on Range Line Road. Sarah was closing up the diner when the warning came through the television mounted above the counter. She'd lived in Joplin her entire life. She'd heard tornado warnings before. She thought about going to the bathroom, the interior, windowless space that everyone knew to go to during a tornado. She didn't go. She walked outside to see what the sky looked like. That's what people did. They looked up. At 5:42 p.m., Sarah looked up and saw the sky turn black and green and moving faster than anything she'd ever seen. She ran back inside. She made it to the hallway. The hallway held. The dining room didn't. When emergency responders pulled her from the rubble. An hour later, she had a broken arm, a punctured lung, and glass embedded in her face. She survived. The diner was gone. She told reporters later that she remembered thinking it sounded like a freight train. Then she said, "And then it was silent, and I couldn't breathe, and I thought I was dead." Dr. Jim Turner, 54, trauma surgeon at St. John's Regional Medical Center. Dr. Turner was in the 4th floor surgical suite finishing a procedure when the lights went out. He had just completed a gallbladder removal on a 41-year-old woman. The patient was still under anesthesia in the recovery area when the building began to shake. Turner later described the sound as the building screaming. Not metaphorically. He said the walls, the floors, the ceilings all seemed to be producing sound as they flexed under forces they were never designed to handle. When the exterior wall of the 4th floor was ripped away, Dr. Turner grabbed the patient, still on the gurney, and moved her into an interior supply closet. He held the door closed with his body as the wind tore through the space where they had been. The patient survived. Dr. Turner suffered a broken collarbone and a severe laceration to his left arm. He performed 3 emergency surgeries in the parking lot of the demolished hospital over the next 48 hours with whatever supplies he could find. Marty and Karen Higgins, 62 and 58 retired couple living on Connecticut Avenue. Marty and Karen Higgins had a basement. That's what people in Joplin did. When the warning came, they went to the basement. They had done this before. They brought a mattress and blankets because they assumed they might be there for a while. They had no idea what was coming. The tornado hit their house at 5:46 p.m. The house above them, a 3-bedroom ranch built in 1972, was completely destroyed. The basement walls held. The mattress held. Marty and Karen Higgins walked out of their basement an hour later into a landscape that no longer looked like their neighborhood. Their house was gone. Their neighbors' houses were gone. The street they had lived on for 30 years was gone. Karen later told reporters that the thing she remembered most was the smell. "It smelled like copper," she said, "like metal, like everything had been ripped open." Both survived. They would spend the next 2 years living in a hotel while they tried to figure out what came next. Kayla Murphy, 16, student at Joplin High School. Kayla Murphy was not at the graduation. She was at home with her younger brother, age 11, and her mother, age 43. They had gone to the interior bathroom, the standard Missouri protocol for tornado warnings. Kayla was in the bathtub when the house came apart. The bathtub held. The bathroom walls held. Her mother and brother were in an adjacent hallway closet. They were not as lucky. The hallway closet was on the side of the house that took the direct hit. Kayla was found by neighbors 3 hours later, still in the bathtub, with minor injuries. Her mother and brother did not survive. When reporters asked her what she remembered most, she said the silence afterward. "It was like the world stopped," she said. "I could hear myself breathing and nothing else." She was 16 years old. She would have to figure out what nothing else meant for the rest of her life. Darrell Williams, 39, Joplin Fire Department captain. Darrell Williams was off duty when the tornado struck. He heard the warning on his phone. He got in his truck and started driving toward the city before the tornado had even touched down. He arrived on scene at 5:52 p.m., before many of the professional responders who had been on duty. What he found was something he later described as a city that had been picked up and set back down wrong. Williams spent the next 18 hours straight performing search and rescue operations. He personally pulled 14 people from rubble. He would later be credited with saving 23 lives over the 3 days of primary search operations. He was awarded the Medal of Honor by the state of Missouri. When asked in an interview what he thought about when he was searching, he said, "I thought about the fact that every piece of rubble could be a person, and I thought about how we were going to have to find a way to tell people that their town was gone and their neighbors were gone, and we were going to need help." At the moment the tornado crossed 20th Street, the point of maximum intensity, something occurred that meteorologists had theorized about for decades, but had never fully documented in real time. The tornado had achieved what scientists call a multiple vortex structure. Within the main circulation, the 1.3-mile wide funnel that everyone could see, smaller subvortices were spinning at speeds far exceeding the parent storm. These subvortices could produce winds of 300 miles per hour or more. The enhanced Fujita scale caps at 200 miles per hour because that is considered beyond survivable for any structure built by human hands. Joplin had exceeded that threshold. The physics were relatively straightforward, even if the results were anything but. The supercell that produced the Joplin tornado had an updraft velocity that meteorologists estimate reached 150 miles per hour. When that updraft interacted with the wind shear present in the atmosphere, the difference in wind speed and direction at different altitudes, it began to spin. The spinning air mass then stretched vertically, conserving angular momentum in the same way a figure skater spins faster by pulling their arms in. The result was a column of rotating air that extended from the ground to 30,000 feet. Within that column, pockets of extremely low pressure formed. Air rushed inward at speeds that converted all available energy into kinetic force. The storm was converting heat energy from the warm Gulf air into wind energy at a rate that had never been observed in an American tornado before. The damage path through the city was not consistent. Some blocks were completely destroyed. Others, just a few hundred feet away, had structures still standing. This was the signature of the multiple vortex structure. The subvortices moved within the larger circulation, touching down in some spots and lifting in others. A house could be standing. The house next to it could be gone. The physics made sense. The human experience did not. People in Joplin would later describe feeling the tornado pass over them. A moment of intense pressure on their ears, a sound that seemed to come from inside their bodies rather than outside. And then looking around to find everything they had known reduced to splinters. The National Weather Service Damage Survey Team would spend weeks documenting what they found. They documented 158 fatalities. They documented 1,150 injuries requiring medical treatment. They documented over 7,000 destroyed housing units. They documented 3 million cubic yards of debris, enough to fill the Houston Astrodome 9 times over. They documented a damage path that, if placed over Manhattan, would have destroyed everything from the financial district to Midtown. And they documented something else. The moment the tornado crossed into the most densely populated area, it had achieved a width of 1.3 miles and was moving at over 30 miles per hour. Nothing in its path could survive. Nothing. The Joplin tornado killed 158 people. Most of them were in the wrong place at the wrong time, but some of them were exactly where they were supposed to be, doing the job they had trained to do. Caleb Dennis, 31, Joplin police officer. Caleb Dennis was on duty on the evening of May 22nd. He had been assigned to traffic control near the intersection of 20th Street and Connecticut Avenue, one of the main evacuation routes out of the western neighborhoods. When the tornado struck, his vehicle was directly in the path. The tornado lifted his cruiser and threw it approximately 80 yards into a field. Dennis was ejected. He suffered a broken back, 3 broken ribs, and a severe concussion. He regained consciousness in the field, unable to move his legs. He would spend 4 months in rehabilitation. He would walk again. He would return to the police department. But his injury would define his understanding of what happened that night. "I was in the right place," he told reporters months later. "I was exactly where I was supposed to be, and the tornado still almost killed me." That tells you how big it was. Fire Chief John P. Martin, 58, Joplin Fire Department. Chief Martin was in the fire station when the tornado struck. The station itself sustained damage, windows blown out, part of the roof torn away, but the building held. Martin immediately activated the department's emergency response protocols. He had been chief for 11 years. He had managed multiple large-scale emergencies. He had never managed anything like this. Within 15 minutes of the tornado passing, his department had received over 400 emergency calls. He had 12 working engine companies and a city that had been demolished. He coordinated the initial search and rescue response with what he later described as impossible resources for an impossible situation. He worked continuously for 72 hours without sleep. He was photographed walking through the debris field on the morning of May 23rd, his face streaked with ash and blood not his own. He retired from the department 8 months later, citing post-traumatic stress. He died of a heart attack 6 months after that, at age 59. His family and colleagues attributed his death to the stress of that night. He was the last person to leave the scene of the Joplin tornado. When the sun rose over Joplin on May 23, 2011, the city that had existed the day before was gone. The damage survey conducted over the following weeks would document the following: 158 people dead, 1,150 people injured, 7,000 homes destroyed, 1,400 businesses damaged or destroyed, 3 million cubic yards of debris, 25% of the city, approximately 2,000 acres, completely destroyed, and economic damage estimated at $2.8 billion. The debris removal operation was the largest in American history. The city government had to negotiate emergency contracts with 17 different debris removal companies. Debris trucks ran 24 hours a day for 6 weeks. Then the cost of debris removal alone exceeded $45 million. The Missouri National Guard deployed 3,200 troops, the largest domestic deployment since Hurricane Katrina. Federal Emergency Management Agency teams arrived within 48 hours, but the scale of the disaster had already outpaced what any local, state, or federal response could fully address in the immediate aftermath. Survivors described what came next. The tornado had destroyed their homes. It had killed their neighbors. It had removed from the landscape every landmark they had used to navigate their daily lives. Streets they had driven for decades were unrecognizable. Churches, schools, stores, all gone. The psychological impact was immediate and overwhelming. In the weeks following the storm, the Joplin community recorded a 340% increase in requests for mental health services. Suicide rates in Jasper County increased by 40% in the 2 years following the tornado. The community would spend the next decade trying to rebuild not just buildings, but a sense of normalcy that had been ripped away in 8 minutes. The insurance claims filed following the tornado exceeded $2 billion. At the time, the largest single catastrophic insurance loss in Missouri history. The Federal Emergency Management Agency provided $126 million in individual assistance. The Small Business Administration approved $147 million in low-interest disaster loans. The city of Joplin issued $512 million in bonds to fund reconstruction. By 2014, 3 years after the tornado, Joplin had rebuilt 1,300 new homes, 150 new businesses, and 2 new schools. The phrase "Joplin Strong" became a community motto, printed on signs, painted on walls, and repeated in interviews by survivors and city officials alike. But the phrase couldn't bring back the 158 people who were gone. It couldn't undo the night. It could only try to make the morning feel survivable. The Joplin tornado changed how the National Weather Service issues tornado warnings. Before May 2011, tornado warnings were issued based on radar data, rotation detected in a storm system, combined with visual confirmation from storm spotters. The average lead time for a tornado warning in 2010 was approximately 13 minutes. After Joplin, the National Weather Service revised its warning protocol to issue warnings based on radar-indicated rotation alone without requiring visual confirmation. The goal was to provide more lead time, even at the cost of some false alarms. By 2013, average tornado warning lead time had increased to 15 minutes. By 2018, it had reached 18 minutes. More time, not enough time, but more time. The Joplin tornado also changed building codes. The city of Joplin, in partnership with the International Code Council, conducted a post-disaster review of construction practices. They found that homes built with continuous load paths, structural connections that tied the roof to the walls and the walls to the foundation, had survived the tornado at significantly higher rates than homes built with traditional techniques. In 2013, Missouri adopted new building code provisions requiring continuous load path construction for all new residential construction in tornado-prone areas. The cost of compliance was approximately $1,500 per home. The estimated increase in survivability was rated at EF2 level events, significant, but not enough to save a house from an EF5. Nothing is enough to save a house from an EF5. The National Institutes of Health published a study in 2018 examining the long-term health effects on Joplin survivors. The study tracked 1,400 survivors over 7 years. It found elevated rates of cardiovascular disease, asthma, and post-traumatic stress disorder across the survivor population. It also found elevated rates of new cancer diagnoses, specifically a 23% increase in respiratory cancers among survivors who had been exposed to the debris field in the first 72 hours after the tornado. The debris field had contained asbestos from destroyed homes, lead from old paint, and a cocktail of other hazardous materials. The survivors were still dealing with the consequences years later. But the most important legacy of Joplin is the one that is never discussed in official reports or policy recommendations. Joplin demonstrated that even in a country with the most advanced tornado detection and warning system in the world, even with state-of-the-art Doppler radar and trained storm spotters, an EF5 tornado can still kill 158 people in 8 minutes. The science had worked, the warning had been issued, the system had done its job, and the outcome was still a catastrophe. Because the atmosphere, when it decides to produce a storm of that magnitude, does not care about human systems. It does not care about building codes or warning lead times or emergency response protocols. It produces what it produces, and people have to live with the results. The conditions that created the Joplin tornado, the warm, moist air from the Gulf, the dry air from the Rockies, the strong wind shear in the mid-levels of the atmosphere, exist every spring. They will exist every spring for as long as the geography of the central United States remains what it is. The National Weather Service can issue warnings, cities can adopt building codes, communities can conduct drills. None of it can guarantee that the next time a supercell forms over southwestern Missouri, it won't produce another EF5. Joplin was not an anomaly. It was a demonstration of what is possible when the atmosphere reaches its limits, and those limits have not changed since May 22, 2011. If anything, they are being reached more frequently. 2011 was the year of Joplin. But it was also the year of the Tuscaloosa-Birmingham tornado. It was the year of the largest tornado outbreak in American history. The atmosphere is getting more energetic. The storms are getting stronger. The warnings are getting better. And the town of Joplin is still rebuilding. If you made it this far, thank you. These stories take time to research, write, and edit. Every fact in this script was verified against multiple sources. Every quote came from documented interviews or official reports. The people whose stories I told were real. Their suffering was real. The 8 minutes that destroyed their city was real. I didn't invent any of this. I only tried to put it together in a way that does it justice. The reason I spend weeks on a script like this is because these stories deserve to be told correctly. Not as disasters, as human experiences. The tornado was an event. What it did to people was something else entirely. And that something else is worth understanding, not because it makes for good content, but because it might help someone understand what it means to live through something that cannot be explained until you've lived through it. If you found this interesting, consider subscribing. These stories require research, writing and editing time that adds up quickly. Every view and every like helps keep the channel running. To everyone already here, thank you. You're the reason this exists. And to the people of Joplin, the city that taught America what an EF5 can do in 8 minutes, thank you for letting the world remember. Your stories matter, your loss matters, your survival matters. Stay alert. The next storm is already forming.